Hey, it's Andy Burns, Editor-in-Chief of Biff Bam Pop, here with the director of John Dies at the End, Don Coscarelli. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Hey, my pleasure.
Super, super excited. So let me start off with this. 10 years in between feature films. Why you've got a fan base that, as I'm sure you're aware, is always waiting for something from you.
I'd like to think so.
Yes. So first of all, why the gap?
Well, a number of reasons. For starters, against my desires, I was forced into the position of actually having to distribute Bubba Ho-Tep myself. Right. So I would say that took a couple of years to get it run through all the way through from theatrical to DVD, so I put on my distribution hat during that period. After that, I spent some time trying to mount a sequel to Bubba Ho-Tep.
Right.
And it was very unfortunate because I got it all put together, we had the funding, and then it just at the last minute, everything collapsed and it fell apart. So that was another couple of years. Then I went to work on the Masters of Horror TV series.
Right, and I was actually going to ask you about that.
Did that episode, and then after that, I think I wrote a couple more scripts that didn't work, and then I came across John Dies at the End, and that was a 3-year process. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So you know, before we just get into John Dies at the End, because I went back and I watched Incident on and Off of Mountain Road last night,
okay.
and it's great. And I'm wondering, as a director, obviously two different formats, right? We're going from television, your background was obviously on the big screen and in film, and going to work on television. Did that affect you? Did you learn anything from working in television that you were able to bring with you to your next film, John Dies at the End?
Well, number one, I think I learned that I want to make more movies in Canada, because we shot it in British Columbia and Vancouver. It was just a great experience, great cruise. It's a little more, the time frame is shortened in television. You don't have quite as many days to work, and so you have to work really fast. And with Masters of Horror, it was a very ambitious project to get that all in. It was basically almost making a movie just a little shorter. Other than that, not much different. I mean, although I will tell you that the format was different because it was a 55-minute movie for the Master of Horror, whereas usually I'm making 90 minutes. So you can't really have 3 acts. I guess you could, but my project wasn't really a 3-act story. It was like one act that just started and went.
It was really nonstop. It's one of the things that I liked about it. It's there's. The way you intersperse, you learn about your characters, and then you also have the action that's going on. It was great. It was nice to revisit it. Getting prepped to come talk to you because it was a cool episode.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say. Yeah, I think that what I liked about that story is that I got to give credit where it's due is to Joe Lansdale, the great Texas writer, who also wrote Bubba Ho-Tep. And what Joe had created in that story, which I loved, was this idea that it starts off very much like just a traditional movie in the vein of Chainsaw Massacre or Wrong Turn or something like that, and yet then the movie kind of turns on a dime, and at the end there's this twist, and this character that you've been living with through the thing, and you suddenly realize, like, who's the predator and who's the prey, really.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, I think it makes I liked it. I don't know if folks got it as such, but what my intention with Master of Horror was that it was a bit of a exploration of female empowerment, and
I got it.
Yeah,
I believe it. Like as when it ended, I'm like, yeah, that was really the first thing that I thought about when I rewatched it last night.
Yeah, and it had some real horror in it, of course, also. In terms of going into the balance of that one rape sequence,
yes.
which are the real horrors, and which a lot of times we avoid those kind of things, but it came to a satisfying conclusion with where
absolutely
the Ethan Embry character wound up at the end of the story.
So you've written a lot of your own stuff, but you've also you mentioned Joe Lansdale and John Dies at the End is an adaptation. Yeah. What do you look for when you're going to work on your next project? Is it how do you know that? Let me be more specific. With John Dies at the End, what was it about that story that you thought, what, I'm I want to work on this. I'm gonna, hopefully make it my own. And what was it about that story that got you working on it?
Well, I don't know. Was it the talking dog, or was it the sentient drug that chooses you, or was it the monster made out of freezer meats?
It's hard to choose just one, isn't it?
There were a lot of really wonderful elements in the story, and it had a very unique attitude and an edge and a sense of humor about it, and it was just different. As I was reading it, I didn't know where it was going. And I like to think, and believe me, I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I hope that the films that I make are different in a lot of ways. I mean, sometimes I'll explore very familiar areas, like I did in the Masters of Horror episode, but I like the unexpected, and I really think in terms of in the pure horror. That one of the things that I learned from Phantasm was that if you can create a story where the audience really doesn't know where it's going, that gives you such an edge in terms of your horrific aspects.
Right.
When the audience is off balance, when they really don't know what's happening, when the audience loses control. So I like those types of elements, and certainly Phantasm was done on a very visceral level, and in Bubba Ho-Tep, same thing. You don't know where that movie's going, but it's a little, it's a little more maybe philosophical in Bubba Ho-Tep, some of that stuff, and certainly in John Dye's there are parts of that, so not quite the straight edge horror, but in any case, trying to be different a little bit, and certainly both the stories, when I read them, they spoke to me as being something different than the usual movie.
One of the things that I dug about John Dye's at the end, and hopefully you'll take it as a compliment because it's completely meant as one. It reminded me of Cronenberg's Naked Lunch in the idea of not having a completely linear story. There's back and forth in terms of different times. I think that. Honestly, John Dye's the end is a little easier to follow than Naked Lunch. But is that something that appeals to you as a filmmaker? Maybe not, in crafting a story that isn't necessarily, let's say, linear, for instance, that you can, go, I guess as you're saying, like go different places, try something new.
Absolutely, and I think that, I think I stumbled onto it with Phantasm because in that project, maybe I'd written a little too large of a script, and so in the editing, I had to make some decisions that required leaps of logic, so I kind of wandered into it by accident. But then as I've gotten a little more sophisticated in my film watching, I noticed that a lot of filmmakers push boundaries, but not that many work with structure that much,
right?
And you can look at the ones who do, and most notably it'd be like Quentin Tarantino, because every one of his movies, pretty much, messes with structure. Absolutely. And so it's something that, some advice to aspiring filmmakers out there is, mess with structure when you're putting together a movie, and you probably could be quite well received, possibly, if you make a decent film.
Completely.
So, but it's something that I find interesting, and I like the idea of putting an audience in a position where they have to really be thinking and paying attention.
Yeah, and that's it with John Dye's at the end. You can't be a passive viewer. You actually have to pay attention to what's going on, which you don't get that in a lot of mainstream filmmaking anymore. And I think that's something that's really important, like to engage your audience, and I mean you totally do it with the film, which is great.
Well, that's nice to hear, and it's something that certainly, look, there's a certain part of the audience, I hope it's a minority, that don't have the patience for that kind of thing. And yet there's other part of the audience that just revel in having a movie that they can think about, digest, and hours or days later they can be putting connections together. And I think maybe one of the most satisfying aspects of the Phantasm series of films is reading and listening to interpretations of the movies from fans who really thought things out, and once in a while they'll catch me on things then I just have to say, oh, that's the tall man's reality distortion effect.
Completely planned.
Yeah, but many folks enjoy a movie that they can chew on. I certainly do. I mean, I remember when I saw, what I see a few years ago, I saw Fight Club. I remember going out with friends afterwards, and we talked about that movie over and over again, because there's a lot of different interpretations on,
Right.
on what that meant and what the director was going for.
I wanted to ask you, what's your writing process like? What's the creative process? You see a story, and you get the rights, and you know that you have to sit down and nail the script. One of the things at Biff Band Pop that we're really interested in whenever we talk to creators is their own creative process. Do you listen to music when you write? Do you isolate yourself for a month on end? And when you're working on a script, and this specifically for John Dies at the End, what was your creative process like?
Music is an important tool. There's no question that I think most people can tell you that, and it's not something you predict, but certain music will almost open creative doors in your mind. And sometimes you'll just be driving and listening to a song, and suddenly 3 or 4 disparate ideas that you've had will suddenly click, and you've got a sequence or a section or an act of a movie, and those types of things are very hard to pre-plan. A lot of it is luck. I mean, when you have the inspiration and you come up with 3 or 4 ideas, and you jot those notes down, then the actual writing process is super simple, because you've got, oh, that idea, yeah, and that idea, and it's easy to write. When you're missing those, it's the hardest thing in the world, is sitting in a room looking at a blank screen, what am I going to do now? So I do find that leaving the location of the writing and somehow working music into it can accelerate it. But I find that it's hard to do that. Now, when we look at an adaptation process, really that's more playing a puzzle.
Right.
Because you've got the material in front of you. You just have to figure out how you want to piece it together and what kind of connective tissue you need to create to put between those. So that one, it's a little easier to sit at the computer, because you've got a lot of dialogue scenes and a lot of things already there,
right,
to work with.
Let me ask you about casting, because one of your casting choices that I really dug was Clancy Brown. Because to me, he was very, very funny.
Yes, he is.
And perhaps playing against type just a little bit. Yeah. So, and I love him. I really love him in just about anything that he does. So So he was great to see. So how did he wind up playing Marconi in John Dies at the End?
Well, he's a great talent who I have. This was the great part about this movie, because I was able to, even though the central conceit of making the movie is I knew I would have to have unknowns to play my leads, but there was that ability to bring in. There are a lot of these interesting characters who populate the movie that don't need that much screen time, and so it was possible to afford and to pay them something decent to come out and do. Clancy is a guy that I have been watching for decades. I mean, from Highlander on through Shawshank Redemption, on through his great role in Starship Troopers as Sergeant Sim, and then Carnival on HBO is just a masterwork. I love that series. So there's a guy that I've just been, I've been waiting for the opportunity to work with. And luckily, it turned out that he happened to like some of my movies, so it was just an easy thing. He's a really nice guy. He's definitely a larger-than-life person, which was perfect for this.
Absolutely,
this character of Dr. Marconi. So that was just a dream for me to be able to work with him. And I would love to try to find a project that I could work on him with him again, because his talent. I feel he's underrepresented. I just think every year there should be a cool Clancy Brown movie,
totally,
or a cool series. And like all of us, he's certainly got his passionate fan base, and it's just finding the right roles that broaden it out.
Yeah, no, I love him, and it's as you said, there's people who will go out of their way to watch him in anything, and it was great to see him in that. Also, Paul Giamatti.
Yes.
And he was also executive producer.
Yes.
So how did that all come together?
Well, interesting story in that while I was doing the Masters of Horror, I was working over in Vancouver, and I got an email one day from horror director Eli Roth. And Eli was doing one of his Hostel movies over in Eastern Europe, and Giamatti was over there working on The Illusionist, I think, or one of those things. And the two of them had a meal, and Eli sent me this email and says, all Paul wanted to talk about was Bubba Ho-Tep. He loves that movie. You've got to meet him, you know. And I said, yeah, that's just Eli being over-exaggerating. He's a very enthusiastic guy. I didn't know. And then I actually, a couple months later, I saw a interview with Paul in one of the trade papers, all about his career. And I said, well, which director would you like to work with next? He says, I want to work with Don Coscarelli. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. And so I got to meet him. What a nice, wonderful, decent guy he is, in addition to being the greatest living actor on the planet, I believe. But the funniest thing about Paul is he's got he does a lot of these highfalutin roles, very intelligent characters and what have you. But he's got a very wicked sense of humor, and he loves genre movies, and I think he would love to be in more of them, but they don't seem to come his way. Anyway, to wrap that up, there's another project we were going to try to work together on. It didn't happen, so I had gotten the John Dye's script, just finished it, and I gave it to him, and he got the humor and said he'd help in any way to get it made. So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so he was very helpful, and also having him on board as executive producer was great. And he just brings what's wonderful. He brings legitimacy to an illegitimate genre.
It's great though to have that in guys who are, in those kind of A-listers in Hollywood to be able to shine a light on some of the genre stuff. It's true because I think, as you said, like, he loves genre pictures. To the best of my knowledge, he's doing Amazing Spider-Man 2, and so there's it's great when guys who love genre picks will actually go into the weeds and actually be a part of it, as opposed to sort of maybe just waiting for the next big Marvel film or DC, something like that.
Well, absolutely true. And the thing is that when you're out casting a role, a lot of times the first thing that you do is go to the IMDb Internet Movie Database, and you look at them, and there are the ones, and you can see that they take challenging independent roles, and then there are other ones that all they do is straight to studio movies, so you just don't even have to waste your time going that path.
Got one more question for you, and I know that John Dye's at the End was at TIFF back in September.
Yeah.
So I spoke to Rob Zombie a couple weeks ago because I saw Lords of Salem when I was there, and when I was talking to Rob, I said, do you get nervous when you're about to screen your film in front of an audience? And I said to Rob, I guess I kind of doubt that you do. I always envision you as kind of like a cool cat. And he's like, I don't really care. It is what it is. Once a film is out there, it's out there. But tell me about when you screen a film for the first time in front of an audience. John, when you screen John Dye's at the End, do you get nervous? Do you worry about that sort of stuff, or is it once it's out of your hands, it's?
Well, I'd like to talk to Rob and find out how he does it, because no, for me it's a terrifying experience. And the sad part about it is that about a decade ago, you could go out and you could have sneak previews and do a little research informally. I used to do that on the early Phantasm movies. No problem, because there was no internet, and nobody's going to go out and give you a bad review on something that's just a partial cut or whatever. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And so you really, I try to screen my movies with, show it to friends and people I can trust and get as much feedback as I possibly can. But nowadays, it's a real crapshoot. You're going out there. Are they going to laugh in the right spots? They're going to laugh in the wrong spots, even worse. Those types of things. So I am mortified. I am petrified. I am quivering before the screenings. And luckily with John Dye's, we got some good laughs and good screams early on. So things were good. But I don't know. I wonder if I just have to talk to Rob someday, see if he was telling the truth about that. 'Cause that's hard to believe.
He sounded very truthful, but then again, I don't know if he'd say, oh, I get so nervous all the time on Tony Buckets.
No, that wouldn't sound good.
No.
The other answers. In fact, I might adopt his answer going forward.
Well, it's a great film.
Oh, thank you.
And,
That's so nice of you to say.
And do you know what you're going to do next, or are you just sort of living with?
Really, no clue. I've been doing a lot of publicity on this one, and just going to start from ground zero. I've been writing a couple different projects, but it's a long haul between that process and actually getting the funding.
For sure. Well, congrats on a great film, and thank you for talking to me.
My
and
pleasure.
Pop.
Really great fun.
Much appreciated.
All right, great.
All right.